these are the things that I already do well, right? And that's why it's so important, to have that knowledge, right? Just thinking about, the background of like I said, talking about strengths finders, we'll talk about that a little bit, but I mean, just the concept of strength-based psychology, right? It comes from, positive psychology, which is something that came out of after World War II, right? Where a lot of folks started really focusing on what it is that we have to look forward to, right? Psychology and, analysis, therapy, a lot of times it goes back to what was wrong here. How do we adjust it, right? How do we recognize it? How do we reckon with it so that it doesn't affect us now and moves forward, right? So a lot of people are dealing with open wounds very often in therapy and analysis, right? Which is, we've already talked about the difference between that and coaching, right? And so, and where coaching is looking forward, or so what have you done in the past that will, recognizing that will help you to be able to, move in the future. What is it that we want to work on? What is the things that are strengths that we can lean on? And so, just, one of the folks, Viktor Frankl was one of the leaders in positive psychology. And he was a guy that he was a Holocaust survivor, and he lost every single member of his family, right? And he, during the Holocaust, and he survived. And when he came out of it, he was a psychologist, and he really focused on what some of the positives, not the positives of the Holocaust, but just moving forward, how to move forward in a positive way. And one of his famous quotes is, between stimulus and action, there's a space, right? And in that space is our ability to control how we respond to things, right? So I'm paraphrasing what he said, but he's saying something happens and then we have a behavior or an action, right? He says, but within there is a choice, right? We've talked about, but first response, that limbic response, that brain response, that emotional response. And if we lean on that and just stay with that, then we will continue to make emotional decisions that sometimes we end up saying, oh, well, maybe there was a better decision. Maybe I should go back and fix those things, right? But what he's saying is you have the option to be able to recognize that, deal with that, and be able to move on in a positive way, right? And so that's really, him and the other, leaders of the positive psychology, right, really focus on that. And so the strength-based psychology was kind of taken from that, right? Don Clifton and other folks. Don Clifton was the originator of StrengthsFinders, right? So, in fact, the actual name of StrengthsFinders is Clifton Strengths, right? And so he ended up becoming the CEO of Gallup and all these things, right? So, but it focuses on our potential, which is which is something that, how often do we focus on what we do well and how to build on those as opposed to what we need to fix, right? One of the you talked about interviews. One of the most common interview questions, right, is what's your greatest weakness, right? And
Mhm.
and I hate that question if it's not paired with what's your greatest strength, right? Because you're giving people an opportunity. I mean, some people ask it for different reasons. Some people ask it to see if they're going to trip you up, or if they're going to identify something that you do that's not going to fit with what they do, right? Whatever else it is, and when I counsel people and I do a lot of classes on interviews, and I tell them, I said, take something that maybe you're not naturally good at that you've worked hard to accomplish, right? So if someone asks me what my greatest weakness is, I tell them that, organization and time management is not a natural strength of mine. It's something I've had to build up and learn over time to be able to accomplish the things that I want to do in life, right? So just, not dwelling on the weakness, but so many of us, we talk about what we want to do, the goals we want to set to improve things, right? To improve our education, improve our career, to lose weight, to get into our swimsuits and all these other things that we, talk about what we don't do. And a lot of people get stuck in that. Well, I'm a bad listener, a lot of people just say I have an attitude. That's just how I am, right? And if you focus on your negative pieces all the time, then that defines you, and that's who you are. Do we have an opportunity to change? Do we have an opportunity to get better? Right? Absolutely. But how do we get there? What are the things that we know that we can do well? What are the things that will allow us to succeed when we activate those? They help us to thrive, right? And so that's such an important piece. Is that's why asking about your top five things that being creative, right? And being flexible, right? That's such an important thing, but people say, oh well, well, yeah, I'm creative, but I never get to use it, or I'm flexible, but you know a lot of people don't like me being flexible, and just whatever else it is. And it's like, okay, well, there's positives and negatives, but people dwell on the negatives more than the positives. And I think a lot of it is what you said. you know we're told not to think too highly of ourselves, not to think that you're all that, right? To be humble, right? Slow down and be humble, right? And which is another one of my songs that gets me up in the morning.
That's one of mine too. Yeah, on that one.
Yeah. But what is the difference between being humble and not being able to recognize the things that you do well? I mean, it's so important. If we don't internalize the fact that our strengths are the things that carry us through tough times, then we forget about them,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
so, and if you got family who, oh, think you're big-headed or you're conceited, and there is a difference between, confidence and arrogance, right? And, arrogance, there's no room for growth, there's no room for change, right? And confidence is, hey, I'm here, this is who I am. I know I can help with this, but then also, you know, I can be confident in hearing feedback, right? Okay, tell me how I can tweak what I do well. Not, you know, I'm stuck in a hole and I need these, compliments to get me out of the hole. It's I'm already climbing up the ladder. What else is going to help me get there, right? What's going to suit my
Yeah.
engine up, right? So yeah, I think it's so important. And a lot of times our families, like you said, the people closest to us are the ones that are are I don't want to say the biggest culprits, but they contribute and they exacerbate that feeling of not being able to focus on what we do well, right? Oh, what you want to go back to school? You barely got out of high school, right? You never liked school and things like that. And so, those people who can speak into your life and we allow them to because they're friends or family, they play a big role and their opinions play a big role with us. It can be something that can keep us from being able to maximize our potential, right? And that's that. If you get, it's that crabs in a barrel, right? Have you ever seen crabs
Yeah.
in a barrel? So, yeah,
Yeah.
crabs are trying to climb on each other to get out of the barrel, and what happens? Another crab pulls them back down, right? And don't think that you're gonna, succeed. Nope. Remember who you are. You're just like the rest of us. And if you're in a friend group, family group that thrives on that, it's real tough to see the light and to see the options and opportunities that are there for you.
Yeah. So a few things as you were talking were coming to mind. I am not usually a detail person, and I'm still not, but I'm working on it. And I wanted to get the Viktor Frankl quote perfect. You had it almost perfect, but it's between stimulus and response, there is a space, and in that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. So just for any people who care about detail, that's the actual quote. So not that's not to correct you at all, Carl, but I just know
Oh
there's
no,
some
thank you.
people who care about the details. And so
It's
that's one of the things I'm trying to grow into is being detail focused, which I'm not usually one who focuses on that. That's at the opposite end of my strengths. So I'm working on it.
yeah.
Um, so a few things came to mind. And one of the things that came to mind was the growth mindset versus a fixed mindset. And it was when you were talking about, kids drawing a little scribble and putting it on the fridge and congratulating them. We are born with some natural gifts, right? Like there are going to be some things, some strengths that you have from a young age, and there are others that you grow and develop. This is again that idea between fixed and growth. So maybe that baseball, um, that kid who's good at baseball in high school, maybe that's a natural gift that he or she has. Um, but that not is not necessarily going to carry them through the rest of their life. And so I think that there's like a real balance between celebrating people's natural gifts and also encouraging them to continue to grow into new ones. Like the skills that I shared with you today are not necessarily skills that I've encompassed my entire life, right? There are things that I've had to learn and adapt and get good at because it was required of my job, my role, my life circumstances, whatever the case may be. Um, and and so some of them are natural. Like I'm naturally creative. I always have been. I have a big imagination. I'm always dreaming and like, what else can I do? Like never settle. But there are other things like being reliable. I I think I share all the time. I was late for work for like 12 years straight, called out because it felt like it, it's just there are things that we grow into. And so part of like being respectable and responsible human beings is to not get stuck in your strengths. Like it's great to have them, it's great. And I think that's the difference between people who are confident and people who are arrogant, is that the confident people know what they're good at and they strive for more. Arrogant people know what they're good at and that's where that's what they rely on. And
Mhm.
so they oftentimes stay stuck and then are later resentful for people who grew and continued to grow and didn't stay. They didn't peak in high school. They didn't peak at middle management. They didn't peak at insert whatever spot you want to. I think another thing that's important for us to be confident in our strengths is also the ability to be confident in the strengths of others, even if they're ones that we don't possess. I, again, am not good at details. I'm a big picture person. I'm all day about like, what's the goal? What's the outcome? Like, let's get there. I'm not always looking at the steps, the details, like, are we going to pay for it? Or how much time is it going to take? Or whose approval do we need? Those are things I don't consider when I'm making my big ideas, which is why um, I try to partner with people who are good at those things. Again, I'm working on it, but it just doesn't come naturally to me. And so I try to like help me with kind of leveraging somebody else's strengths and learn from them in the process to
Mhm.
grow and develop into that skill set. Um, so when we're talking about strengths, especially at work, and families as well, um, we have to be able to be honest with people's strengths, but also helping them grow, but leverage those strengths to help us as an organization grow. Um, Not everybody's going to have the same skills, and that doesn't necessarily mean like for fairness that you have to give everybody the opportunity to have the skill set. Um, we have to really kind of be thoughtful about making opportunities and creating opportunities, but also not forcing people into something that they are not comfortable with, they don't want to do, they have no interest in, as a way of growing their skill set. Um, because a lot of times what it does is it turns them off. So an example I can think of is I was working with a county far, far away, and I came in to do a training on motivational interviewing. This was years ago. I was doing motivational interviewing training, and the vibe was just off. Like the vibe, like the whole room was, and I know I'm hilarious. Remember, I told you it's one of my strengths. I'm funny, and everybody was just like poker face. Like I'm like, what the hell is going? Is it me? Like, what did I do? Um, so I finally, like, after a couple hours, like after our first break, I was like, okay, it's really going to be hard for me to help you motivationally interview other people if you yourselves are not motivated. So there's obviously an elephant in this room. Like, what is it? Like, let's
Yeah.
get this out of the way. Like, let's because that's we only had five, but that's another strength is I'm pretty intuitive and I can pick up energy. And so I'm like, let's just rip the band-aid off. There's something that has to be addressed here because I can tell that none of you are invested in this. And so one of the people told me, like, well, our county and our managers are here, and they were in the back row, by the way. They had four managers in this department. All of them were sitting in the back like this.
Mhm.
And nobody wanted to talk. Everybody was just pissed off. So they said, well, our management, we have to facilitate workshops or I don't remember again, I don't remember the details. That's weird. Uh, but essentially what had happened is that they had a handful of people who were volunteering to do this job. And it required travel. It required them being out of the office. It required them to kind of be outside of the norm. We had a group of people that volunteered that were willing to do this new task. And management decided no, everybody would have to rotate. And so the people who were getting put into this task were really pissed off about it because they're like, I have kids. This is going to mess up because it requires some travel. This is going to mess up my schedule. This is going to affect my home life. This is going to take away from my work. Um, I don't want to do it. Like whatever it was presenting, again, presenting workshops. I'm not good at presenting and I don't want to present. I don't want to be, I didn't take this job to be a public speaker. I don't want to do it. And if maybe nobody volunteered for it and we had to do it because it needed to be done, I might be more willing. But the fact that there were people who are capable and able to do it and can do it well, and you're still making us struggle through that, it pisses me off.
Yeah,
And so it's like when we look at strengths, it's great that we want to build people's strengths, and it's really great that we want to grow people, which is important. And at the same time, we have to be thoughtful about when maybe we're asking people to grow into a mold that they may never fit in,
sure,
right?
absolutely. And that's the important
Never,
thing is, yeah, recognizing your strengths, right? And playing off them. That's what the theory, the strength-based psychology theory is. Utilizing your strengths, leveraging what you do well, right? Which for some people it doesn't sit well, like you mentioned. Well, everybody should know this. Everybody should do this just in case. Why? If I'm never gonna have a job where I have to do this, or if I'm not going, if right now in this moment, if I don't feel like, I'm going to be applying for a job where I'm going to have to do this, then why should I have to? I'll give you an example. On a previous job, I had a boss who I was a trainer, and we had coordinators setting up classes for us, and they would set up the rooms, let people know what we needed when we got there, and also they would cater our lunches, right? And for some reason, my boss thought, and so those folks, they got paid for that. I got paid for going in there and presenting the classes. And my boss thought it was important for everybody to know what everybody did, which is true. It's important to know what everybody does, right? That's so important. But there's a difference between knowing what somebody does and then having to do it, right? And so she switched our roles a couple times where some of our coordinators had to teach classes, and just small classes. But then she would have the trainer, me, do the coordination piece. And like I already mentioned, that's not my strength. That's not where I come in. Time management organization. That's not something that lights me up. That's not the reason I got into the job, right? I mean, I can do it if I have to, and I have done it several times, but that's not something that really excites me. And so, I tell people all the time, one of the hardest things that I had to do in that job was to order 30 lunches from Panera Bread for people. That was not standing in front of people for 8 hours and facilitating a conversation and listening and being flexible and responding to people. It was ordering those damn lunches, right? And getting in contact, setting up the rooms and things like that. And the coordinator said, I wish I could do it for you. And I wish you could, teach this little class for me because I've never been one to stand up in front of folks. That's why I've never applied for those type of jobs. I've always liked to be the person in the background, helping people, right? And that's something where people, if they know what they like to do, then why not leverage that, right? It's just like, when I having conversations with people who are in the same role. If if you have to do, what's in your job duties, if somebody's really good at connecting with people and somebody's really good at, you know, doing specific things, right? So even though we have the same job duties, can maybe one person do this a little more and then the other person do the other thing a little more, right? It's as much as when I was in case management, one of the things that I would do is I would be the person to unjam the copier, right? And because copiers get jammed, don't they? Right. And
Yeah, they
so
do.
whenever there's a jam, hey Carl, is there any way you can come fix this? And if I wasn't busy, I would do it. Or if when I got done being busy, I would go do it. And I didn't mind it, but that was something that if my boss would have said, well, we're all responsible for unjamming the copier, sure, people have done that, but then they're like, yeah, I made a jam and and I don't know how to unjam it. I mean, but then that's a conversation of, okay, well, here's what you might be able to do before. Maybe you don't stick so many pieces of paper in there that can help, or or
Right.
set up that thing. But once stuff gets jammed, and not everyone wants to get their hands dirty, right? That was something I didn't mind doing because I knew it was needed to be done, and I can do it, and I don't mind it, right? So that was something that is a strength for me. And I also recognize I get to help people, right? I get to help people by doing that. So that stuff is important, right? So putting people in those positions, right? With bank folks, there was two people who, one person was really good with technology and processing things, but their conversations with folks about accounts and life and building their assets and things like that was not a strength. And then there was another person in the same job who was really good at the personal piece, but the technology piece really was a challenge, right? And so, we had, I offered two different strategies. I said, if we can have them both kind of team up and support each other, is that something that can happen where that person who's having technical issues can lean on that person who can manage those technical issues or the technical processes of their job, while the other person is the person who might call somebody and to have, those one-on-one personal conversations. Can we do more than, oh, well, no, because they both have to do the same thing. Okay, well, that sure, they're both technically, I mean, they're both adept at what they do well, but how are they growing and helping your team, your organization, right? If you have somebody who's really good at the technology piece, lean on that because then the technology piece gets done quicker. If you have somebody who is better at the relational piece and the selling of products and whatnot, think about how many more products you're going to get sold, right? How does that benefit you and the organization rather than, trying to force a square peg into a round hole? Right. And that's the important thing. When recognizing different people's personalities, we all come at things with different abilities, right? And not every job is for everybody. And that's an important, we've already talked about that. Some folks they take jobs because of the pay, because of the benefits, but then they find out once they get into it, this is a different animal and I'm not happy, right? Which leads to disengagement.
I want to say that here, I just want to clarify, like what we're not suggesting is that if you run a business that you only have people do what they're good at. Like, that's not the message that we're sending here. There definitely there has to be opportunities for growth and for training and development and building people's skill set. So maybe someone is more naturally inclined to the people part, not so much the technology. This doesn't mean that we don't help grow their skill in technology, or we don't work on the soft skills with the person
Yeah.
who's better with computers. Like that's not what
No,
we're saying. We grow
no,
people, we help them
we
develop.
grow people. Right.
Um, but I agree with you. At the same time, you also have to be really thoughtful of putting people in the right places to thrive, right?
Yes.
And this was one of my other thoughts I had when you were talking earlier about the positive psychology, is that whether we know it or not, or agree with it or not, people need to have successes to be able to continue to grow. So if all I ever hear about is what I'm doing wrong, what I need to do better, and how I improve, or how I need to improve, I'm not going to do as well if there's some measure of positive reinforcement. And this is not about participation trophies. This is not about like, oh my God, you turned your time card in on time. I'm so proud of you. You're so amazing. Like, that's not necessarily what we're talking about, but really that acknowledgement of what people bring to the table, and celebrating that in a very genuine and thoughtful way.
Hmm.
Um, and this is not just with individuals, but even as organizations. When we think about how do we problem solve and um, how do we problem solve and how do we fix challenges and how do we address issues? A lot of times, in work situations, we take on that like deficit mindset. What are we doing wrong? What needs to improve? Where do we need to get better? Which again is not a terrible conversation to have, but again, it's focused on just problems. It's not focused on strengths. So one of the techniques that I really like, and you all, we can talk about it a little bit, but it's something easily Googleable, is a technique called appreciative inquiry. And appreciative inquiry is just really a shift in the way that we problem solve, and not just looking at what went wrong or what's going wrong, but a way for us to acknowledge and maximize what's going right. So instead of like, I know a lot of places right now, for example, are short staffed, that don't have enough employees to do the work. And so instead of asking the question, gosh, why does nobody want to work here anymore? Which again is a legitimate question. But instead say, well, what makes people stay? Why are people choosing to stay working here? What is working and how do we amplify that and make it better? So if I know that, again, I can say, oh, what are the challenges? We don't have enough health insurance. Well, I can't necessarily get a new health insurance provider right away. It's a whole process, and if you have a union, it's even more complicated. Um, but what is making people stay? Maybe one of the things they really like is our culture. Okay, great. So how do we maximize the culture to attract new people? And so I think appreciative inquiry is a really great tool just in life to, not just always be looking at, well, what's going wrong and what do we need to make better, what's going well, and how do we maximize that and use it to fix some of the challenges that we already have.
Yeah.
So if I know as a person that flexibility is one of my things that I'm good at, when a problem occurs and I still have problems, instead of being like, oh my gosh, this is a problem, whose head needs to roll for this, then I lean on that strength and say, well, I'm very flexible, so how can I be flexible in this moment and kind of rise to the challenge, and then I can address the problem later. We can look at root cause and fix the root of it later, but right now I need a solution that's going to fix it right now, versus being paralyzed by whatever the situation is. So I love appreciative inquiry just as a thought process in problem solving. What are we doing well? How can we leverage that to fix whatever challenges we're experiencing? It gives you a whole different perspective when it comes to problem solving.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's so important. I mean, one of one of the coaching questions that, they teach us in coach school, right? Is what have you done in the past to address this? What have you done in the past to fix this problem? Right? Which is, it seems like a simple question, but how often do we go back to what we know, especially when we're mired in, in despair or frustration, right? And it's something that will elicit people saying, well, if I've had this situation before, then I would do this, I would do that, I would access this, I would talk to my aunt about babysitting, or, I worked with, I had a boss who, would let me discuss how I'm feeling. Oh, okay, so that works for you. Oh, so maybe that's something I need to think about, that maybe you need a little bit more time. There's some folks who rip the Band-Aid off and tell me what's going on. Other folks, maybe they need a little bit more time to be heard and to have a conversation, right, about what's going on. So just having that ability to say, you know, um, what have you done in the past? What are your strengths? Where, how, what have you used to solve this issue before, right? And is
Mhm.
that something that you're comfortable with? Because the more that people are comfortable, the more that people are confident, right, in their ability to solve something, the more often it's going to get solved. And, in mentioning, the fact that other people, putting people in positions to succeed, it just, even if people have the same job duties, there's stuff that's outside, other duties as assigned,
Mhm.
right? And we had somebody on my team who was the birthday person. It was the
Mhm.
potluck coordinator. And they seemed to find time in their schedule. They were a good employee. I mean, they were, putting up the same standard amount of numbers, if not improve it better as everyone else. And yet they still had time to plan parties, plan potlucks, plan those recognition opportunities, right? Because when it's something that interests you, something that you enjoy, that you're good at, you will find that time. You will find that energy, that motivation to be able to make that fit where other people are like, oh gosh, I have to set up a potluck. Why do I want to? I never, I don't do parties, right? And things like that.
Right.
So that's the importance of people recognizing and us recognizing strengths in other people, right? So that they not only do the hard part of the job, but also they have parts of the job that um, you know, energize them and light them up, right?
Yeah.
And how can we help them to leverage that energy and that strength so that they go home and aren't necessarily thinking about what they did wrong, but how they, really enjoy the day.
Can I also say here too that good leaders um, really do maximize people's strengths and are not intimidated by them. And I have like a personal example of this. One of the reasons I left my last workplace is because um, I was not allowed to utilize my skill set, even though I was able and willing to do it freely. It caused, I think, a little discomfort from other people who did not have the same skill set. And I want to say this like gently because I don't want it to sound arrogant, but I happen to have a skill set in training and development. It's something I have 20 years of experience doing. Um, I'm great at it. I think that it's important. And so I'm passionate about it. I want it to be high quality and meaningful. Um, and so when I went to go work for one of my last organizations, one of the first things that I noticed is that they had no official training program for like staff, like ongoing staff. And the way that I kind of discovered that was because nobody in our office could answer a simple question. You could ask three people and get three different answers, and there was no place to look for the answer. It was just all word of mouth. And so I see this gap. And again, this is my skill set. I talked to our regional manager, not the assistant to the regional manager, but the assistant, the actual regional manager. And I talked to her and I said, look, I know I'm new to this county. I know I'm new to this department, but this is a really good opportunity for me not only to like learn job, but to also kind of help develop our local processes. And I happen to have a skill set in training and development. So I'm not asking to be a trainer or a developer, but on top of my regular duties, would you be willing to allow me to coordinate like a committee of people with more knowledge and experience in this department to put together training content that we can do like monthly meetings with all staff, if for nothing else, to get us all on the same page? because it's not fair for our clients that if you get assigned to me, I give you one answer and you get assigned to somebody else, you get a different answer, and you get assigned to somebody else, you get a different answer. Your luck of opportunity shouldn't be based on who you got as your caseworker, right? Like
Mhm.
to me, that's inequitable service, not something that I want to see. So she was like, I don't care. I'm on my way out the door. Do what you want. So perfect. So I did, and I like the intention was, and mind you, I'm one of the newest people in this department. I'm brand new to the program. So um I got together with our seniors, which is what most people call lead workers. They were called seniors there. I got our supervisors together. We came up with a list of topics, and I said, I'm new, so I'm looking at things with a fresh eye. I'm willing to go through like our county policies and like think about what I learned from my training that was just recently. And then I will put it together, and then we can come together and say, is it right? Is it not right? We need to add this, we need to add that, like using all of your local experience and knowledge. And none of them would actively participate. I would say, here's what I have. They're like, yeah, that's good.
Mhm.
I don't think any of them ever read it. But nonetheless, I was really doing the research and doing it based on county policy. And this went on for almost a year. And can I tell you, the people in office were loving it. Honestly, they were so excited. I got so much positive feedback like, oh, I've been doing this job for 20 years and I learned something new today. Like, this is great. Now we have some written procedures, we have something we can reference. Super excited. And then we got a new regional manager, and things were kind of flying under the radar. I was doing this every month, every month, every month. But then we got a new supervisor, and this new supervisor and I did not get along.
Mhm.
And one of the reasons that I think, got us off on the wrong foot was that I brought up the fact that I was offering opportunities to participate to the seniors and supervisors, and they weren't taking advantage of that. And what I wanted to avoid, and this was like something I said was really important to me, what I want to avoid is to do it based on just my interpretation and then train a bunch of people and then a supervisor raise their hand and say, no, that's not how we do it. Like you've had a long time to give me that feedback ahead of time. And so that's exactly what happens, is that this supervisor, who again had an opportunity to participate in the process, chose not to, and then tried to punk me essentially in front of the whole group. That's not right. That's not correct. Okay, well, then what is the right answer? Let's talk about it. And then I called a meeting and said, look, this can't happen. It's confusing for people. I want us to, this is working. We're seeing it. So that supervisor and the new regional manager were like, well, first of all, why are you even doing this? This isn't even in your classification.
Mhm.
I said, oh no, I have volunteered. I have been doing this over a year, but I'm ready because, again, I may not know details, but I'm protective. So I was ready to protect my baby because I was really proud of the work that we were doing. And so I came in and I showed stats and data from when we started, where we were at in terms of like accuracy, engagement, and then showed a year later, after a year of training, how much we had improved. And I had all of the examples, I had all the receipts. Because one thing you're not going to do is punk Tiffany Salcido. I'm just letting you know now. What you're not going to do is try to act like I'm not doing a good job. Um, and so um, they basically outed me out of my own committee and said I couldn't participate in it anymore because it was out of my classification, and that they were going to give it to the seniors and the supervisors. And I said, fantastic, fantastic. Because that's who I've been wanting to get involved this whole time. That's why we actually
Mhm.
called this meeting.
Yeah.
But it was really like an ego thing, that because I wasn't in that loop, that who am I to do this job, even though I was really good at it, um, because I didn't have the title for it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah, and guess what? I left that job shortly after and went into a job in training and development. By the way, I did all of that work on top of all of my regular duties. And I was like one of the number one people in our office on my
Mhm.
regular duties. So nobody suffered. And they
Yeah.
got free training and development, free on the house. And
Yeah.
they said no because they I didn't have the title, even though I had the strength. And
Yeah.
that's an example of what not to do because they lost me altogether. I quit.
And that's one of the things I hear a lot when it comes to government service, right? Is the hierarchy, chain of command, that is not your classification, that's above your pay grade, all these things. And so people say those things, right? That's
Yeah.
above my pay grade, right? Um, I had a conversation. I was working with people from Department of Social Services the other day, and we were talking about bias. And one of the things somebody said was, "Well, it is what it is." And I said,
Mhm.
"Okay, well, is that a how often do you hear it is what it is?" And people say, "Oh, all the time." I said, "Okay, is that a positive statement? It is what it is." People are like, "No, I guess not." I said, "Is it even a neutral statement? It is what it is, status quo." No, I guess. I said, "Well, how does it make you feel when you hear it is what it is?" Well, I hear it so much. I just recognize that it's just what we have to deal with. Yeah, so maybe that's the status quo of the organization. But if we are in status quo mode, how are we ever being responsive to new things that come down the pipe, new opportunities for growth, for development, for reaching people, right? People complain, kids these days. Well, this generation moves different than our generation, and we want to hold them back. I mean, just think there's a whole movement out there in this country that wants to take stuff back to the way it was when they were kids, right? Because that's
Right.
so wired in our brains, right? And so, um, but that's something that stagnates growth and opportunity for people to learn and to be put in a position where they can grow, right? So, talking about leaders identifying strengths, there's many tools. Appreciative inquiry is great, right? But what if that person that you're interacting with hasn't really even thought about the things that they like to do as opposed to the things that they know they have to do, right? And so another tool that's there is the Clifton Strengths, the StrengthsFinders, right? And it talks about actually recognizing what people do well. And so just the theory is just based off of, there's four different domains that Clifton identified, right? That talk about, and I'm going to share the screen real quick and just to show you the the picture. And so hopefully you all are seeing this, and you see that there are four different domains in Clifton Strengths, right? And there's the executing domain, which is getting things done, right? How do we focus on achieving, right? Accomplishing tasks. And then you have influencing, which is how do we get people to move in the direction we want to? So being charismatic and being someone who can move people, right? To get buy-in, to get motivation. And then there's relationship building, which is not it's still a people thing, but it's more about how do we connect, you and I, one-on-one, small groups, right? Our team, right? And then strategic thinking, which is based off of, doing research, being analytical, breaking things down so that we have sound rationale for being able to execute, right? So, and I equate this to a lot of different things because I have so many models in my brain, but just thinking about the executing is like a D in disc, since we've already talked about disc, right? I knew you were writing
I
stuff
just
down. I
made
could
that
tell you.
connection. I just literally was like DISC. Done.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's why this is arranged in this graphic is arranged that way, because it is very much along with the disc, right? The D is for executing, influencing is more of I, right? Qualities, relationship building is more of S, and the strategic thinking is more of a C, right? That doesn't mean other folks can't use those. Remember, talk about flexibility. Jung says we can use both sides of our brain. It's just we tend to lean towards one more than others, right? So there was 34 different themes that popped up as in each domain. So there's eight or nine in each domain, and you can go from the top down and just recognize, achiever, someone who likes to achieve, take tasks and complete the circle, right? Close the circle and finish things, right? Which is something that you and I both, would like to do more of, right? Or like someone else to be able to do more of so that we can do the other stuff, right? People who
Mhm.
arrange things, put things together, right? All the way down to, discipline, focus, responsibility. And you have influencing, so someone who activates people, gets people going, right? Gets the crowd going, right? Just like in what was that, Blades of Glory or whatever it is. Um, Being able to communicate well with people, maximizer, looking at people's potential and seeing or looking at our team's potential and seeing where we can go to create a vision, right? Self-assurance, that you have confidence in your ability, that you are not only confident but competent in that, and you can back that up, right? Muhammad Ali said it ain't bragging if you can back it up,
Mhm.
right? So that's definitely important. And then the woo, right? Which is that charisma, that you know it,
The Riz,
the riz,
the
absolutely, right?
Riz.
For the kids out there, right? And then relationship building, connecting people, developing people on a one-to-one basis, right? Having that empathy that we've talked about for so much, right? Including others. So what do you think? What are your thoughts, right? Individualization, like I mentioned, recognizing people individually, that we are not a monolith, and that different people have different needs for connection and for performance, right? And then strategic thinking, being analytical, breaking things down, going beneath the surface, right? Just, we stay so much on that surface level. How do we get below the surface to really get to the heart of the issue, right? You know, Futuristic, thinking about the implications of what we're doing and how it's affecting us down the road, right? Intellection, we're really using our brains to say, this is what I know, this is what else I need to know more of, right?
Mhm.
And being a learner, just constantly being in that mode where we're growing, right? And our brains are like the universe; they're always expanding, right? And so, that growth mindset, neuroplasticity lasts, until the day you die. You never stop learning, right? And so, unless you have an impairment that keeps you from activating that part of your brain, but even then, right, there's some impairments that where you still have neuroplasticity, right? So, just looking at all of those there, what are the ones that really stand out to you, Tiff, that you that just kind of highlight when you're looking at them?
So what I'm looking at here is I see some that I think are my strengths that I don't always acknowledge. Like I'm definitely strategic thinking is not like my go-to approach, but I'm also a lifelong learner. I'm always trying to learn something different. I'm always trying to like get new information. I'm also good at putting things in context and like looking at all of the sides of something and thinking about the past, the present, and the future. So those are things I think I'm good at that I don't always acknowledge that I'm good at.
Mhm.
Uh, and then I also see some that I definitely could do better in, like discipline. I'm not very disciplined. I When it comes to stuff I'm working on my own, I'm also not very consistent. Again, I get really big ideas. I'm definitely in that influencing part of it where I get really good ideas and then they kind of fizzle out. Although I do real quick, I am one third done with my book that I'm writing. And one third, I've gotten part one is done. I only have two more parts to go, which is significant
Yeah,
given that we are in our busy period. And to make time to write after being in like the busiest work time when I don't have a lot of downtime is pretty significant. So I'm really working on building those strengths. What I really see here is that we all have a little bit of everything in every category. I'm influencing and relationship building are two that I'm probably most connected to just looking at this chart. Um, but I do, depending on the circumstance, have some of the executing and strategic thinking strengths when I need to use them. And so
yeah,
I really do believe that um, as people, we all have all of these things in different ways. Some of them will come easier than others. But if we're intentional about it, we can grow in these areas to improve and build upon the strengths that we already have. So I can be competitive, which is something that comes naturally to me. We don't invite me to game night unless you want a hole in the wall. So I'm just saying it now. I can be competitive, but I also can learn to be a bit more disciplined,
Hmm.
and using that, like, can I be the most disciplined person at this table, right? I can use that strength to try to match something else. Um, and so that's what I think about this is just an opportunity to grow. And you don't know what you don't know until you know. So maybe I can say, like, these are my strengths. Maybe I don't recognize that I'm really good at harmony. And can I use that harmony to maybe complete some more analytical stuff? So can I connect with someone with that skill set to help me harmonize even my own thoughts and all of the input I'm getting from other people? Can I
Right.
use that to grow my intellect and learn? So that's what I think about. Of
Cool.
course, maximize what you're good at, but don't forget to improve in those areas where maybe you fall a little bit short.
Sure. But being a strength-based theory, the first
Hmm.
thing that Clifton Strengths wants you to know is recognizing what
Right.
are your top strengths, right? So these are 34. If you ever have an opportunity to take the StrengthsFinders assessment, if you buy the book, I think it was like $15 on Amazon or somewhere else that maybe you want to use if you don't use Amazon. And you see the book on the screen there, StrengthsFinders 2.0. Inside the book, there is a code that you can go on to the Gallup website. It gives you instructions in the book, and then you can actually take the StrengthsFinders assessment. When you take the StrengthsFinders assessment, the first thing it does, based off of the code that you have, is identify your top five strengths, right? And so you have those top five strengths, and then you have others, right? And of course, Gallup, those other strengths are ranked from 1 to 34. And if you get past the paywall, so you got to pay a little bit of money, right? But you can actually have a full description of your top five strengths, your top 10 strengths, and then 11 to 34, right? And so, um, what they really want you to do up front is recognize what is it that you do well. We can spend all day talking about the things we want to do better, right? And very often our goal setting conversations are based off of what we want to improve. What if our goal setting um, conversations are based off of what we do well and how do we get better at that? And in a work setting, right? We want to improve on things. We need to improve on things. Absolutely. My number 34 is woo, right? I'm not a self-promoter, never have been, right? And so, I know probably my career would be different a little bit if I was able to, just put myself out there and not worry about, you know, you know, getting, too much out there, whatever else it is. But, I know my top five strengths that were identified in the assessment are from all four, right? Or not all four, but that's the thing. You can have strengths in different areas, even though some of them connect with you a little more. Three of my top five are in relationship building, right? My number one is individualization, right? So, like I mentioned, recognizing that people are individuals. I think my number two is empathy, right? So, really trying to hear people and to recognize how they are responding, right? And to see them and to feel it, right? So that I can connect with them and how they're feeling. So that other focus that I was talking about, that's really a big thing for empathy. And then relator. So I tend to connect with those people that I connect with. I like to keep them around me. I like to develop just a little um, network of folks that are really important to me. And then um, two other strengths are in two different domains, right? So maximizer, right? So I look at things, I look at people, and I think about, okay, this is where you are right now, but I see potential and try to maximize, make sure that if we're going to do something, we do it not just right or just by the book, but how can we enhance that and make that better, right? Which is something that I see that with people and in things. And then strategic thinking. I have learner, so I'm always learning, right? And that's something I think has been reflective in my life and in my educational pursuits and in my pursuits professionally. I'm always growing. I love models. I love new things that really make sense to me, right? And I want to share them. I tell clients, I tell people in classes all day, hey, if something comes up that you guys say, just no, is it okay if I get to share it in another class? Because that's how people learn. I mean, they don't want to hear what I have to say all the time. If I say, hey, I was in Tulare County and somebody mentioned this, right? That helps people to connect even differently. So I know those are
Mhm.
my top five, right? But then, like I said, I bought the All 34 report. It's called an All 34 report. I think it was like $50. But you know, the All 34 report will give you 2 pages on each of your top five, and then 1 page on your 6 to 10, and then a the 11 to 34, you get decent chunks of paragraphs that explore those things and what they are. So the goal of this is to recognize what you do well and then how does it show up, right? Because you can be great at connecting people, but what if you're not in a position to connect people? If is that something
Right.
that really floats your boat, right? Like you said, communication, right? If communication is one of your top strengths and you want to connect people, you want to teach them, if you're a learner, right? And you've got all this information you want to share, and then you're told that you can't. Those are things that can hold us back. But if that's something we can leverage, how do we leverage our top strengths in those? We can talk about what we want to do better we do it all the time. That's not what this is about. I'll give you an example. I do a StrengthsFinders class for Alameda County. And Alameda County has a program, and I think you were part of it this year, right? So Alameda County has
Yep.
a program where they take folks that are on public assistance and they choose a cohort and they take them through an on-the-job training and everything like that. And so at the end of it, they have full-time jobs, right? And so
So cool.
one of the classes I teach is StrengthsFinders. And so they take the assessment, they have their top five strengths, and in each of the classes I've taught, there's been one person that said, "Hey, so what can I do with this? Like, I'm working for the county. What type of jobs would this help?" Right? And I think somebody had analytical and input and and strategic. And I said, okay, well, have you ever thought about being uh, an analyst? She goes, "What's an analyst?" I said, "Well, what job are you in right now?" "Oh, just I'm working, I'm going to be an admin." I said, "Okay, well, an analyst is somebody who's a couple steps above and looks at the program and really comes up with breaks things down, statistics." I said, "Do you like statistics?" "Yeah, I like statistics. I just don't know how to do them." I said, "Okay, well, so I mean, you could be an analyst, you could be, a program analyst, or somebody who really is into that. Okay, well, what do I need to do that?" I said, "Well, a lot of times it's a bachelor's degree and experience." "Oh, okay, well, I only have my high school diploma." I said, "Okay, well, if you want to do that, what do you think you could do?" "Well, I could, Laney College, I was working on, but thinking about going back to get my AA, and maybe I can go to Cal State East Bay and get my in human services or statistics or whatever else I like." I said, "Okay, cool." Right. So, when do you want to do that? "I'm gonna go look when I get home." And so that conversation led to other people at their table. "Hey, so do mine." Right. And and that's something that a lot of times people don't even know where their strengths lie. That's the power of this. We could talk about what we do wrong all the time, but the power of this lies in what you do well, where do you see it happening, and how could you make it happen more? And so that's the conversation leaders. If you get your folks in the strengths finders that you want to have with folks, not looking at their number 34. How can you be better at woo? Right? No, it's okay. Your number one is achiever. So, how do you feel about achieving? Well, we never seem to get anywhere. We just go in circles. Okay. So how can we make that better? That's the conversation we want to have. Right. But you got to be open to it, leaders. But it's a powerful tool, and it's something to really look, if we can maximize it in our work And it really can be a challenge. I mean, it can really be helpful, right? So
Yeah.
playing on people's strengths and just recognizing not everyone's ready. I'm a maximizer. I see potential in everyone. Not everyone's ready to jump in when I say, oh, you could do this, you could do that, you could do this. Oh, hey, pump the brakes. So just recognizing that just because something's our strength doesn't mean it's going to be somebody else's strength, right? But what is their strength and how can we leverage that to make our team better, to make that person better, to make our organization better, and to have growth and development. So
Yeah.
that's StrengthsFinders. Do you got any tips as we sign off?
I really am interested. I'm going to look more into Strength Finders. I've heard about it so much, but I haven't really ever done any actual test or anything like that. Again, I've
Yeah.
heard of it, familiar with some of the lingo. Um, but here's where I would kind of say maybe if you don't want to go that technical route, maybe not buy the book and do that. I would say just be strength based in the way that you think. Not just about yourself, but of other people. So I would say, part of that judgment is the next time you have a negative thought about somebody at work and they're irritating you or didn't do what you wanted them to do and you got something bad to say about them, maybe go a little bit deeper and think about something that they're good at.
Yeah.
Something maybe that wasn't their strength, and maybe there's something else in a way that you can utilize them in a different way. Because I don't believe that anybody's all good or all bad. I think everybody has things that they're great at and always stuff that you can work on. Um, but I think we have to be more intentional. I keep using
That's
that word wrong.
another Tiffany is
Intentional. It's right there with Ripplelicious. But I think we do have to be more intentional about being able to see and acknowledge not just our own strengths, but the strengths of other people, especially in times of conflict and hardship. So that would be my hot tip.
cool. Yeah. And just recognize rather than what's wrong with you, what is it that we're dealing with? And how can we use your strengths to help accomplish that?
Yeah,
That is powerful. Right.
for
Okay.
sure.
Well, we have reached the end of our episode. So thanks for being here, everyone. And we'll
Yes.
definitely have this up. Remember, like and subscribe. It really does make a difference if you like and subscribe on Amazon or Apple or wherever you get your stuff, right? And let us know what you think. Add comments if you guys want links to some of the stuff that we have. We'll be glad to share our models with you. So
Absolutely.
until the next time, I'm Carl,
And I'm Tiff.
and let's keep it
Keep it
real
real.
strong, y'all. Keep it real strong.
All right. Are you flexing?